We are the only plaster shop in San Francisco at this point. There are other artisans that do mold making and can do things like this, but there's no other place that has an archive like this. We are here so that people who want to do right by their buildings actually have the proper resources to actually do the right thing by their building.
Welcome to The Trades Show. I'm your host, Briana Ottoboni. This season, we're on location with artisans in San Francisco. In the epicenter of AI, speed, and innovation, we're exploring a return to slow, a return to craftsmanship, a return to what makes us human, our ability to make with our hands and our hearts, not just our heads. Thank you for being here. Welcome back to The Trades Show. I'm so excited for you to meet today's guest. It feels like she unlocked this whole other world of artisans that I now can't wait to have on the show. Today's conversation is with Lorna Kollmeyer, who is a sculptor, a restorer, a mold maker, and caster of ornamental plaster. She is also the owner of the last plaster shop in San Francisco. Our conversation spans Lorna's story of how this work sort of fell into her lap, what ornamental plaster really is and what the process entails, the privilege of not only being able to preserve the plaster trade, but truly being an archive of San Francisco's Victorian history. We also get into what it means to do right by a building's history, the business of ornamental plaster, and the necessity of just being creative in whatever it is that you do. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I do. Without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to The Trades Show.
Thank you, Briana.
Of course. So I want to start by just having you tell us a little bit about how you got into ornamental plaster to begin with.
Do you want the short version or the long version?
Give us whatever version.
All right. I'll try to top bullet points. I came to San Francisco in my early 20s after being a basketball star all through high school and college, after having played a year of basketball in France, thinking I was going to be a basketball coach, suddenly ending up after that year in France here in San Francisco going, I'm not sure I'm ready to go straight back into coaching. I was enchanted by San Francisco when I first landed here. I just thought, wow, for me, I just wanted to take a break from the world of women's basketball. I just kind of had lived it my entire life.
What about San Francisco was so enchanting, do you think?
Oh, God, the architecture. I mean, as a kid that grew up in post-war, working class Los Angeles County, where every fourth house was the same floor plan. Great place to grow up. Total Leave It to Beaverland.
Great reference.
I had just never seen anything as quirky and unusual. In San Francisco, nothing was the same as anything else. And it was just so refreshing to my soul. I just loved the individuality of it. I also loved the individuality of the people up here. It's just, they're just a tiny bit less shallow than the LA mentality. You know, people up here are just not that concerned with how tan they are, which...
Yeah, well, we can't be.
Exactly, and the weather's so bad, and it's like you're too busy doing intellectual things like reading books and stuff to worry about like your perfectly manicured lawn or... But I really loved San Francisco. There were so many nonprofits and people working to save the environment, and I just was so inspired by it. And I thought, wow, I don't know what. I knew I needed to take a break from that path of basketball. And I thought, well, I'll just kind of get off that bus here and kind of spend some time, because I don't know what I'm going to be doing or even what I'm looking for, but I just felt I'm going to find it here. And so that landed me on the ground in one of the most expensive cities in the country with basically no plan and no experience in much of anything except I had a small degree of carpentry, a summer building a cabin in the mountains of Colorado the year I graduated from college in Colorado.
How did you end up there?
To get out of Los Angeles.
That was the first stop.
Yeah, it was the first stop. Colorado College. Yay, go Tigers. Anyway,
I love it.
Colorado College. There you go. Anyway, so I was kind of scrambling around. My mom had sort of said, well, honey, time to get maybe find some health insurance. It was sort of like the final kick out of the nest. And all of a sudden, the realities of being a grown-up and, you don't get a whole 3 months of summer and you've got to pay for all these outlandish things like car insurance and health insurance. And so I had to kind of get to it and start making some money. So my first job was at the Jewish Community Center on California and Presidio, which was 4 blocks from where I lived, and worked in the gym. I worked in a cafe, Beyond Expectations, on Sacramento Street, 1 block away from my house. I worked in a bicycle shop. I worked managing. I was trying to really think of, like, if it was not going to be basketball that was going to be my big career, I wanted to do something that involved, like, helping the community and involving itself in sports and athletics in some way, because I've always been an athlete. And so what I started doing was working with a group of people thank you, Amy, that organized sporting events. They organized running triathlons and 10Ks and things like that. It was the early 80s, and running was the whole craze. So I did that for a while, and one of the things that fell into my lap was meeting a couple named Peter and Helaine Marchant, who swam at the JCC, so I knew them from there, and we also hung out at the same little cafe on California and Divisadero. And they lived up on the corner of Broderick and Washington Street, and they asked me if I knew anybody that would paint their fence. And I'm like, seeing dollar signs before my eyes. I was like, I can paint your fence. That'd be like an extra little windfall of money. Anyway, that worked out, and I got paid, and Peter offered to have me come once a week to help him with projects around the house. He would do wonderful artistic things in the house, like take a door, and instead of having the door open with one handle and pull out to one side, he would split the door so it would open like a grand room. It was very sweet. And he'd make hidden bookcases behind closets and things like that. And for many years, they restored Victorians. He was a scientist. He was a highly trained metallurgist. And when Peter learned that his efforts wearing his lab coat for Raycam were making Agent Orange or something during the Vietnam War, he just walked away. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And so they scrambled to make a living, and what they ended up doing was buying a pair of dilapidated Victorian flats, of which there were many during the late 60s and 70s. You could pick up a dump of a building for $25,000, and they would get in there and live in it while they were working on it. They'd get one unit ready, they'd rent it out as soon as they could get some income going from the property. And in flipping these houses, which I don't think it was called that then, but
or restoring. Yeah.
It was just, like making a killing, buying something at $25,000 and like flipping it for $32,500. That seems an insanely low amount of money, but it was a lot then. They figured that the more Victorian stuff, ornaments that they could put back into houses, and that it would increase the selling price, which it did. And so Peter, being the scientific type that he is, figured out how to take down originals from the places that he bought and strip the paint, make his own molds. And so he probably carted that collection of molds around from project to project for years, mostly just for his own projects. And along the way, the owners of Cliff's Variety Store, Martha and Ernie Aston, said, hey, you're making these things. They were good friends because Peter was in Cliff's all the time buying stuff as his local hardware store. And Ernie said, why don't you make some? And hang them on the wall. So Peter suddenly had this little account and this little enterprise going with Cliff's that I think he probably did for maybe a year or so. And he actually no more wanted to continue like making ornamental plaster for a few $100s on the side. He just wanted to be done with it. So I came along and he said, do you know anybody that wants to buy a plaster business? And my first response literally was no, but I'll ask my friends. And then I said, well, what is it? And he took me down into the basement and showed me these beautiful ceiling medallions that he had. I was just completely enchanted by it. I just thought it was really a beautiful thing. And not only that, but to be able to make a $1,500 every 3 months or so with a hefty Cliff's order meant that I did not have to lay awake at night wondering how I was going to make my car insurance payment or something. So it was a very lucky thing that fell into my lap. So that is why, you know, I am not somebody that said one day, hey, I know, I want to go into ornamental plaster. Unlike her, I am pointing to my partner, Amy, who came to me and said, I love ornamental plaster, and I just put myself through school with a degree in historical preservation, and I'm doing a paper on ornamental plaster. So anyway, those are two kinds of people in the world.
Yeah. Can you bring people into what ornamental plaster is and how would you even describe
Sure. Ornamental
this craft?
plaster is, I guess you would call them decorative architectural accents that are part of many period architectural styles. So the Victorian architectural plasterwork involved hand-drawn template crown moldings, those big cove moldings that you see in Victorians. Those were all hand-done in place by very skilled, trained plaster artisans. Then there were the decorative ceiling medallions and fanciful brackets that would go in a doorway to make a squared off passageway, kind of more rounded at the corners. And not to mention that there was a lot of decorative things that went on the outsides of buildings. And then as time progressed and styles kind of went through the Edwardian era and on into the 20s and 30s, a lot of Mediterranean architecture was being built. And with tile roofs and stucco fronts and a lot of cast ornamental accents like shields and heraldry. And actually the Mediterranean styles had a lot more cast ornamental crown moldings. So we have a whole wall of crown moldings of that era. So there's Victorian picture molding that was actually made out of wood and laminated composition, which I can tell you what that meant, but it's basically a wooden item. But now they don't make that kind of thing anymore. Maybe one or two people in the world do. But there is a lot of call for the need to have an extra few feet of that because either they knocked out a wall or added a wall and need to continue that style, or they add a room and they want to continue the picture molding that matches. Anyway, stuff like that. It's basically decorative ornaments.
Okay, and so when you took over the business, you had bought the business and were sort of paying it back in installments as you got jobs, quite literally learning on
Yes.
learning on the job as a new business owner.
That's correct.
Bring us into what that was like a little bit.
Well, all I knew that I was going to be doing was making ceiling medallions and supplying Cliff's variety store. And also, well, it came later, but we also ended up supplying Omega Salvage, which was a beautiful architectural salvage store in Berkeley. And Steve Drobinski from Omega was out here one day for open studios and found that there was a plaster shop and like shook me down and said, we want you to supply. So I had 2 original wholesale clients. The next part of the story then goes to, I'm sitting in the Riviera Cafe one day, and in comes a guy named Frank who was on my bicycle racing team. And Frank says, Lorna, I work for these contractors and they're putting a bid in on this hotel that needs some ornamental plaster. and you make molds, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I can make a mold. I figured I could make a ceiling medallion. I could make something for the front of a house. So anyway, I made an appointment with his employer, which was CK Construction, Kevin Korse and Alan Klonsky, RIP, both of them. And they made an appointment for me to go down to their office and look at this job. And so here I am, like, this is my first appointment in my role as new business owner. And Peter and Helaine are coaching me, and they're saying, now, if there's something that you don't know how to do, don't let on. Just, you'll figure it out, but just go in confident. And yes, so in I strut to their office, and Alan says, oh, I'm so glad you were able to come. We have to get our price to the general. They were putting in a bid to do the facade work. That was their subcontract, not the interior, not the foundation, but to do the decorative facade. And he said, we have to get our price in tomorrow to the general. So we need you to sit down right here and look at the plans and come up with a price for us. And I sort of said, oh, then glanced at the blueprints, of which I'd never seen blueprints before, and shake my head knowingly. And they set me up on a little drafting table on the opposite side of the room and gave me a pen and paper and a calculator and said, come up with a price. Now, which I would never, ever allow myself to do. Now, so this is a project that not only did it involve making molds of what was historical ornament. The Majestic was such that all of the original ornament had been hacked off, removed, and covered over with stucco in some kind of weird neo-Tudor style. And what they were working from to restore to was historical society photographs. So I had to look at that picture, and this is a building on a corner, and it has probably 8 or 9 different bays, not to mention like a 6-sided bay on the corner. And every facet of 3 stories of that building was covered in a different plaque on each different level, not to mention egg and dart, these huge mermaid panels, which were way up at the top, which were 9 feet high and 5 feet wide. And all of it had to be sculpted from scratch. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm like, trying.
I have such a distinct visual of you just sort of
God.
frozen.
I'm like following, okay, here's the elevation. This one goes to page A.3, and, just learning as I go. And anyway, I came up with this outrageously high number of $23,000. And I totaled everything up and I went, oh my God, that is so outrageous. I'll make it 20. I did the whole bass-ackwards thing of what you're supposed to do when you come up with a bid and then add 10 or 15% for everything that you're going to forget. Anyway, I gave it to them for $20,000 and didn't think anything of it until everybody was still waiting to see who was going to be awarded this contract. Meanwhile, my friend Frank pops into the Riviera Cafe again and he says, God, I heard about your bid. He goes, I heard that the next highest bid for the plaster work was $56,000. And I just was absolutely petrified. I just thought, oh my God, I am ruined. I'm going to have to leave town. What have I done? And my only saving grace was like, oh my God, maybe they just won't get the bid. And I just sweat bullets, prayed to the goddess in heaven, please don't let them get the contract. And a week later, there I am working at Pacific Bicycle, and in comes Alan Klonsky and says, we got the bid, let's get to work. And I was absolutely terrified, and I just didn't quite know what to do. And I got a lot of calming down, don't worry, you'll figure it out. And from that moment, there was an angel on my shoulder, because my 2 best girlfriends at the time, who were my local pals, my friend Allie Pearson, who was my friend from Colorado College and the reason I came to San Francisco in the first place. She and my friend Lori Lambertson, who I met, who worked at the JCC. She was a swimmer, lifeguard there. And we rode bicycles together. They had both recently graduated from the Art Institute, and they were both like, oh, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we can sculpt that, no problem, we can help. Allie took on the mermaids. We did this whole sculpture and then divided it into 9 different pieces so it could all be put up modularly. And then Lori, she took on sculpting all of the plaques. And in the meantime, I'm there just working with them and helping them and watching what they're doing and getting like the best sculpture lessons that I could get. Anyway, it worked out. And then I was still working out of Peter's basement at the time. And it was pretty obvious that all of this material was not going to be able to come out of Peter's basement in Pacific Heights. So Allie said, this was in 1983, 84, and she said, I just scored she's an amazing painter, canvas painter, fine artist, and she said, I just scored this lovely studio out at Hunters Point Shipyard. You should come out and check it out. She goes, it's such a big room. She goes, you could share half of it with me while you're doing this job. We could set up tables and make it work. And I'm like, that would be amazing. And so we made a time for me to come out and look at her space over in Building 101. And while I'm there hanging out with Allie, Paula Turgeon, who was the daughter of Jacques Turgeon, who was responsible for originally getting the lease on a lot of these buildings, she ran the front office for the Point organization. And she said, well, what are you doing out here? And I said, well, I'm going to be sharing Allie's studio with her doing this ornamental plaster project. She goes, well, why don't you get your own studio? And I was like, oh, well, that's quite a commitment, you know. She goes, hop in. And she took me in her car and she brought me down here to Parcel B. And she said, there's this room, these puppeteers, these puppet makers were working in this little room, and it was the one room in Building 104 that had a back door directly out to the back patio. She goes, yeah, there's this big patio out here. There's a spigot of water right there, and you can set up tables and you can do all your casting outside. So, boy, and it was a month-to-month situation, so I was not committed to any lease, but anyway, it landed me a studio. I was able to buy a truck to move materials around. I had a team working with me to help do all this stuff, and it got me through. And my boyfriend at the time, who is now my business partner, Mike, he said, you know, I talked to my dad, and my dad was in construction. He goes, don't worry, there's going to be some change orders that'll come on, like some additions, and then you can charge more and, you know, make up. And sure enough, there were additions that came through of little things here and there that I was able to charge adequately for. Anyway, that started me out here at Hunters Point Shipyard, and it has just grown and blossomed. But to this day, there has not been a building that I have worked on that had more ornamental plaster on it than the Majestic Hotel, which was my very first job that I didn't know what in the heck I was doing.
Yeah, a lot of trust, it sounds like, has gotten you here, and
Yeah.
it's worked.
Yes, it's the seat of the pants, the wings on the seat of the pants. You know.
I had a conversation with a blacksmith that was a couple episodes ago, and he talked about when he first started being like too dumb not to say no.
Yes.
Or too dumb to say no, and he just put him in situations where he had to figure out how to deliver whatever he said he was going to deliver. And I think that is so much of you learn, because now you wouldn't say yes to those jobs, but also you would not necessarily be like pushed to that edge at this point.
Yeah, I did end up taking on a lot of things. And we were talking about my friend Chris Yerke earlier on, who is willing to take on any insanely complicated project that he has no idea how he's going to do it, but he knows he'll figure it out. So that's fun. For me, that's nightmare. I didn't want to ever turn down work. God, I took on these things. Like there was this designer down in Monterey who would go to Morocco, and he'd buy these amazing urns and these hand-done urns out of this very soft kind of, I'm not even sure what it is. It's kind of half clay, half plaster, and it's all carved by hand and stuff. And he'd have these things shipped from Morocco, and he'd say, I want to make molds of these. And these are like these gigantic urns, these three-dimensional objects that I was like, whoa, sure, I'll figure out how to do that. Oh, God, what a nightmare. You know, working with big, heavy things. I was not a trained mold maker. I've really learned my mold making skills as I go.
Yeah.
But I've taken on a lot of things, from those kind of oversized things to, you know, Peter and Helaine had this little collection of angel molds. There was like a little pootie with a towel right, and a little pootie with the towel going left, and there was a pootie playing the guitar and a pootie playing the harp.
I love those ones.
There's a little thing. And so I thought, well, I'll make a bunch of these. And sure enough, some gal came through from Open Studio who had this little gift shop in New Orleans. Gretchen Breckenridge was her name. And she was like, I must have these pieces. They are so beautiful. And she'd give me these orders for like 120 of these little angels that I had to paint and make and put little hangers in and package them and ship them. And so we learn what we are good at and what we like to do and what we can just kind of go. Now I have designers, I've made a lot of mirror frames, and you know, designers want to have these beautiful plaster mirrors done, but a plaster mirror can't be just a plaster mirror. It needs like a carpentry around it and
something to frame it in.
To frame it, and you know, and I've kind of sworn off making mirrors. It's like, don't want to do any more mirrors. They're just too much headache for not enough return, you know.
Yeah,
So,
but it's all part of the process. You just kind of try and experiment. I think ornamental plaster is probably new for a lot of people listening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's different than woodworking, which is pretty straightforward as to what it is. Can you just walk through the process of how it works, what it is from getting an order?
Yes, okay.
Working on a job.
If you look around our showroom, I try to show one up of every type of category, like from corbels to Victorian picture moldings to egg and dart to ceiling medallions. So we've got a big showroom of all of these things. And every single item that you see in this whole shop was something that was brought to us by a client that said, we need this belongs in our house and we need more of them because we're adding on, or there are some that are damaged because of the paint or the weathering on the exterior of the house, and we need to have a mold made. So every single thing that you see in here, and there's thousands of items, every single thing that you see was brought to us by a San Francisco or Bay Area person that cared enough about their house to pay us to have a mold made. And so I look at this collection as it's San Francisco's collection of things. It was made by so many caring, loving homeowners and restorers in the city. And we have been fortunate enough out here at Hunters Point in this beautiful torpedo training center to be able to house room to have a showroom so that we can display all these things and to keep the molds that we have so that it's a living library now that people can walk in. And we kind of keep teasing, but it's very soon we're going to have a little bell that whenever like somebody comes in and says, oh, I need this, and it's like, ding, we already have that. So, and that's happening now like about 60 to 70% of the time, which is kind of cool.
That you can reuse the pieces.
We already have what somebody has brought in that would have needed to have been made, but we've already made it, and it's in our collection, in our archive. So we really are a living archive of stuff that people daily use for the restoration and the preservation of their period architecture here in the city. So anyway, when we get one of those pieces, it's usually full of paint, might be dinged up. We ask people, like, bring us the best one that you can find. So we strip the piece, we repair whatever broken bits there are, and then we mount that original, or that pattern, the original pattern, And then we apply rubber to it, which is the actual mold. It's the flexible mold that we make. And then on top of that flexible rubber, before we take that flexible rubber off and we just have this floppy piece of rubber, we have to put what's called a mother mold on that flexible rubber so that when the plaster becomes rigid, it comes off, sometimes in one piece, sometimes two pieces, and we reassemble the mother mold, and then we lay that rubber piece down into that rigid plaster mother mold, and that keeps the thing steady and solid so that we can then pour wet plaster into it and make reproductions. And that's what we do for people.
So cool.
So, yeah.
So cool. I know you shared with me the Artistic License Guild, but it's all of these artisans who are, and there, you said there's the Victorian Alliance and all of these organizations that are really like a collection of artisans specific to restoration, preservation of these historic elements. And your work is so tied specifically to San Francisco. Just what is that like? What is that like working in a space that is really like defines the aesthetic of going into San Francisco?
I look upon it as a privilege. This plaster business it fell right smack into my lap. And as hard as I tried to think of something else that I should be doing that would be more important, it always ended up being my bread and butter. And I liked the work, It did not involve athletics, but I found a way to channel my other creative energies. I'm a musician, so I do music. I started singing in my 30s. And so that kind of, that having that musical outlet channels all of that kind of like creative action energy, performance energy like basketball. But I really look upon this business as a privilege. It's like we are just custodians. The whole craft is really sort of an anonymous craft, and we're trying to bring names to it. We've got high aspirations of actually doing some historical research and finding, like, if we can see names other than the Samuel Kellett Company, whose picture we have in the back of our showroom. We can find like a couple of 3 or 4 different bloodlines, if you will, or design lines of what the medallions fall into, that they share a certain leaf pattern or a certain rose or a certain starburst or something, and you can kind of trace the relations of them, like that must have been coming out of the same shop that has the same sculptural hand on it. So it's really very gratifying to be part of the city's history. I'm in a guild called Artistic License, and Artistic License, I call it the brain trust of period restoration. It's all of
it's like a gold mine of crafts.
Yeah,
it's like my dream, but
it is amazing. It's like an elite group of really talented artisans, artists, craftspeople who bring such a passion and expertise to helping people do the right thing by their building. You'd be surprised how many people, they want to do something and they want to like put something up, and sometimes you just have to talk people out of things. Like, nah, that shouldn't really go there. You kind of help people do the right thing. And it's very gratifying to know that we are here so that people who want to do right by their buildings actually have the proper resources to actually do the right thing by their building. And San Francisco's architecture, its own quirky self, and not have to go buy ceiling medallions from the Home Depot. And
I didn't even know they sold them.
Yeah, they're foam or plastic, and yeah.
Not the same.
So anyway, it's working. I always thought to myself, what a frivolous thing this is. Like, how can I justify, like, my brothers are firefighters in Los Angeles County, like that's a real job, and and I'm thinking, like, I'm making little pretty ornaments for buildings, but it's actually turned into quite a stable business, and it fills a need that people really rely on.
Yeah, have you seen that change throughout your time in ornamental plaster, that more or less people are wanting to go this route when they're thinking about restoring or renovating homes or building new homes too? Is this something that people are adding more into new builds?
Not so much exterior wise for new construction. And it's, in a way, it kind of looks weird. It's like
Really?
we've gone to minimalist architecture and like suddenly to come up with nobody's really come up with a new authentic architectural style that brings back a lot of frill. It doesn't really quite work on modern architecture. And also modern architecture, especially when homes are being built, they are built on a budget that usually does not incorporate much
Frill.
That said, have I seen changes? Well, in the 60s, the hippies, and the 70s, gay guys came in and started just renovating these and making beautiful again these beautiful homes. There's then the dawn of the outrageous color palettes, and I think it kind of goes back to hippie stuff too. It's like color and flamboyance and
Life.
so, and individuality, individual expression. So for a while it was like everybody was just like restoring, putting back, making it, and there was a lot of inventory of houses that needed tender loving care and to be restored. And then that kind of lasted on into the 80s and in the .com when the whole first thing started coming out, and there was a lot of youth wealth, if that's a expression. And for a period of time it's been happening where very ultra wealthy people will come in and pay cash for a beautiful old Victorian, and that facade, because of the laws that we have for the preservation of certain facades, they can't mess with that, but they'll come in and just absolutely gut and modernize Victorian's interior, which is understandable.
Tragic.
It's understandable and yet tragic when it's done to an extent that it has really no respect for the character of that exquisite interior. And the real heartbreakers are you walk into a Queen Anne Victorian and you'll have beautiful fretwork, turned wooden fine fretwork that goes over the interior arch, and a beautiful wooden balustrade going up with a newel post, and a conjoined living room, middle parlor with pocket doors and incredible crown moldings and stuff. So much of that got absolutely gutted. Omega Salvage was full of it. They would just come and yank out all this stuff, and it was just kind of
heartbreaking.
A little heartbreaking. Yes, it's don't buy an old house if you don't want an old house. Anyway, that happened a lot. And I have to say, a lot of those remodels, if you will, completely understandable. And for example, I am all for blowing out the back of a Victorian, opening up the kitchen, making the kitchen and that room next to it an open big space, because that's how we live now. We don't have servants fixing our dinner in the way back dingy kitchen, which was the most undecorated room in the house. We cook together. Those are our main rooms of commerce in the kitchen. And so that kind of thing, I think, is just a great addition to a Victorian house, because we don't live room. But yeah, to see a lot of the beautiful interiors ruined. However, pendulums do swing, and as a Libran, I'm very aware of
Love it.
we all have an equilibrium to strive for. You don't ever want to attain it, because then you just stay still. You just got to kind of stay in motion. And all the stuff that's coming out of those Victorians, now we're starting to get business to put it back.
Yes.
So it is very interesting how that works. And some other fun things that are starting to happen is a lot of designers are picking up on creative wall decorations or stuff that can be used with ornamental plaster, with traditional ornamental plaster items. And we've done big ceiling sprays of leaves and flowers and different kind of assemblages in the spirit of Sir John Soanes, who is one of our heroes, the Sir John Soanes Museum in London, who was one of the original collectors of architectural fragments. So if you're ever in London, Sir John Soanes Museum on Lincoln's Inn Fields.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him.
Amazing.
Just as you're talking, the one thing that I keep thinking about is really that balance of this really ancient, old school, beautiful craftsmanship, and how do we balance that with modernity? And, I think about that a lot in technology of how can it support that, but even just I remember watching a video of someone describing San Francisco houses, like you said, of the outside is this incredible Victorian facade, and then the inside is like a white box.
Yeah.
And how that is sort of evocative of San Francisco in a lot of ways, of this like new tech culture, but it's so sad. Like, it's such a different feeling to be inside of those homes and to miss out on a lot of that. Even the building that I live in is like 100 years old. And I feel like when I first moved in, I had all of these sort of interior design ideas of what I wanted it to look like, and basically designed the entire room before I had even moved in. And over the years, every time I do a new little renovation, as I like to call them, with all my interior changes, I feel like it just starts to connect a little bit more with the actual architecture and what's actually happening in the house rather than competing with it. And I think it becomes this like beautiful symbiosis where you can have really modern and things that you like and things that match your style, but also are matching this beautiful taste of what was originally, and it's like this respect for the people who originally built it.
Right. It's interesting. So I had this one project up in Pacific Heights. It was a nouveau riche sort of, situation where they had just boodles to spend on these custom ceilings that we did for them. And so I get this call from the designer that they are going to want me to do 3 rooms of custom ornate ceilings. And I'm like, okay, how cool is that? And I go into the house and I look at the room that I'm supposed to design a ceiling for, and there is an outlandish display of what my dear friend Jane Powell, who was a wonderful designer and writer about period architecture, she would call ceiling acne, which was canned lighting everywhere in that ceiling at random places based on what furniture was going to be placed against the wall. They'd have to have a canned light over the credenza. And so I'm sitting here going, I've got to design whatever ornamental plaster I do to fit around all of these holes in the ceiling. It's just kind of challenging. It's very interesting. But that was I'll show you pictures sometime, but that was a very interesting challenge. There was a landing in that house, and the landing had a ceiling as the stairwell turned directions. That landing had all these little fragments of flowers, and unfortunately that had to come down because it had to be earthquake proofed and beam reinforced and everything. The owner's wife was so upset that had to come down, and I actually they'd kept some of the fragments. And so when I designed their living room, or the biggest one I did was their dining room ceiling, I took those original fragments and I made these little panels and incorporated them into that ornamental ceiling that I made for the dining room. And that was pretty fun, although I think I appreciated it more than I think kind of went over the head of the owners. But anyway, that was kind of a fun project.
Okay, there's 2 more things that I want to talk to you about. One is, compared to a lot of other artisans' works that are either, they're maybe making things and they have inventory that they're selling, or they're making things to order, or they're doing custom jobs. Some of the jobs that you have are more like the construction trades where you're bidding on projects. Can you just kind of bring people into the business of ornamental plaster? And you said you're able to keep it a sort of sustaining business. And I'm curious, what are the different components that go into your business model and how do you keep it that way?
Let me put it this way. There's not a lot of call for huge ornamental things. And when there is, they are usually over my head. So for example, a lot of the grander homes up in Pacific Heights and stuff, they have these like gigantic Tudor ceilings, and those were done a lot of times in situ plaster workers that learned their craft and how to do template drawn, like in situ profiles and drawn crowns. I've learned that kind of thing is over my head. If it's a small repair, I can help you out. But there are companies that, like from New York, that will come out and handle doing like a whole Tudor ceiling or something. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about with the Tudor ceiling, where you've got like a star and a square and a thing in each, and they've all got to be measured to the T to fit symmetrically in the room, and that's just kind of beyond the level of job that I'm comfortable taking on. As far as like just being a business, the business end of it, what I have to do mostly is when people come in, I have to give them a bid on making the mold, and based on the complexity of the item, the condition of the item, how much time it's going to take to restore it, how big the mold is, how much plaster, how many we could crank out per day. It's like the setup fee is basically making the mold, and then the per item casting is what we would charge for something that we were casting out of one of our own molds. I guess there are a couple of guys in town that can make molds and stuff. I don't know who I'm bidding against really, because a lot of our competitors are no longer in business.
Yeah. Are you the only?
I think we are the only plaster shop in San Francisco at this point. There are other artisans that do mold making and can do things like this, but there's no other place that has an archive like this, and this is why we are fighting so hard and so desperately to get the powers that be that want to knock everything down here and build condos on the site where we are right now, to just recognize this place as a jewel that would enhance whatever neighborhood happens to be built around it. Because at this point, every other plaster shop, there were probably 3 or 4 other ones. There was San Francisco Victoriana, Michael Casey and Associates, George Payne and Associates. George went out of business. Michael passed away, and his wife Cindy tried to keep the business going for a number of years. But the price of commercial real estate in San Francisco, there's just not enough ornamental plaster work to merit, to be able to afford to pay the rent on a commercial real estate place in San Francisco that's large enough to house something like this. I could afford a little room where I could make somebody's mold and cast out what they want, but I could never keep the molds that comprise the archive that we are. I'm kind of diverging a little bit.
It's okay, diverge away.
We're in kind of a no man's land out here on this old Navy base here on Hunters Point Shipyard. It's an artist community of about, close to 300 artists, I think, most of whom are in a larger building on another parcel. And there are a few of us in outbuildings down here on parcel B. But other than twice a year for open studios, there's open studios out here in the spring and in the fall where the public is invited out, and there's people swarming the place, going in and out of artist studios. That's twice a year. Other than the random artist that has a visitor come out here on an invitation basis, we are already a draw out here for people all over the city. I mean, we have anywhere from 10 to 20 people out here per week
Yeah, who otherwise would probably
who
have no
otherwise
other
would
reason
never
to
come
be
out
here.
to
Yeah.
Hunters Point Shipyard. So the argument for retaining this lovely place, which, like I say, it belongs to San Francisco. It doesn't belong to me. I am going to die someday. Anytime soon, not to worry. But Amy will keep the business going, and it will continue to be this gem of a resource for San Francisco. What they have offered for studio replacement is they want to take all of us artists down here in this area and build a big brand new 5-story concrete building hovering over Building 101 that nobody's guaranteed how much the rents are going to be. It's going to be a brand new building, which will have to be assessed for brand new taxes, and it will take a lot of management, and it's going to be way more costly for the artists to exist in that building. They can't guarantee what the rents are going to be beyond the first 3 years, which is like, we'll get you in there, but no telling if you're going to be able to afford it once the cap comes off of the rents there. So the best way to survive for this whole artist community out here is to keep us where we're at, which is a charming, lovely, historic, authentic artist community in these beautiful old buildings that definitely need love and attention. And you can see how beautiful Building 101 is, because it's already gotten love and attention, and it looks great. And it would take a little bit of love and attention in these buildings, and they'd be just as spiffy, and not to say they don't have their charm in their dilapidated conditions that they're in. So that's that.
And then you talked about Amy in the beginning a little bit, how two different kind of people who come into ornamental plaster, but you have this kind of built-in succession plan with someone who came to you and was really excited and wanted to learn this trade. And for ornamental plaster, not necessarily just here in San Francisco, but more broadly, how do you think that the trade can survive? What do you feel like we need either as a society to fuel it, or what different pathways are there for people who are interested in it for them to go on and actually create sustainable businesses from it?
It's very interesting. So we are old school. We are definitely dinosaurs. We deal in good old plaster, and we do have a fancy plaster for outside, FGR 95. And we have fancy rubbers that we can use to make the thing. But essentially, we are a business that is not different in too many ways from when the guys that originally made the stuff. And I think one cannot deny the ever expanding role that technology can play in creating these things. At this point, you can scan me and make a reproduction of me and 3D print it, and it's pretty cool. They can do that with ornaments as well, although it's still costly to scan, it's costly to print, and at this point, people still want to use traditional materials in their houses, especially interiors, exteriors as well. People don't want to put up plastic, and it's not always cheaper. But we can't deny the fact that technology is there. I was explaining to you about our job the other day where we had some wrong measurements and hand sculpted a plaque that suddenly we realized that 3 months worth of sculpture work was not going to work. So we actually were able to take it to a 3D printer and scan it and reduce it to a size that could be used. But then we still had to take their casting, their product that they reduced for us, and make a mold of it so we could cast it in the harder plaster. I think we have to go through on into our future fully aware of what technology is capable of, but also aware of the ever appreciated aesthetic of having something that's handmade. And I know, especially now that I'm starting to be old, I'm starting to have friends that are youngsters, and I'm meeting more and more 30-something that are telling me that they are starving for things that are handmade or that are not designed on a computer and spat out by a machine.
Robot.
By robot, yeah. As far as like a shop like this that not only provides historical content, but also provides an educational and historical process is a valuable resource for the city.
Yes. I could talk about this for hours, but that's my favorite. You talked about the pendulum swinging, and I just gave a talk where a big thing that I was talking about was how, 250 years ago, we made everything by hand because we had to.
Yeah.
And we've basically been building the technologies to make it so that we don't have to.
Yeah.
But I think in that process, we've also learned and understood, well, what parts of those processes actually make it special, and where is the process of making and the materials that we're using to make it just as important as getting to the end result. And it feels different in all the conversations I have with artisans, like the end product of something that is handmade is such a viscerally different feeling or energetic quality than, a
Yes.
piece of IKEA furniture. And those things have their place, but this pendulum is swinging back. And I think we are really learning to appreciate and understand those things more and more.
Well, and I think when you have a great respect for homes and houses, because houses, they outlive us all, and they see so much life, the ephemerality of life just passing through them. And they are the ones that are kind of this calm, consistent backdrop to all these different phases of people's lives in different generations. And I think there's a real emotional attachment to that, to the comfort factor and the respect of those quiet walls that have heard it all and seen it all, to be able to participate in retaining the beauty and the dignity of the homes, I think, is one of the things that I enjoy most about what I do, what we do.
Okay, well, to close, I have a couple quick round questions.
Okay.
Some of these you kind of touched on, so you can just say...
Lightning round.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The first thing that comes to mind, but one, we talked about technology and craft, and so what's one way that you have seen technology negatively impact craft, or plaster specifically?
Go to the ceiling medallion aisle at Home Depot.
Perfect. Okay, and then one way that you've seen it positively impact it.
It saved my ass on this plaque job when I was able to get a plaque that I had spent 3 months sculpting by hand, be able to be still used on a deadline for a facade job that we had to make it the right size, and they were able to do that.
And then what are you most excited about in the world of ornamental plaster or historic and preservation and architectural work?
What I'm most excited about is the people that walk through this door, to see their eyes light up and go, wow, so this is where all of the leaves that are dripping off of all of the buildings, this is how it's made and this is where it comes from. I get delight in having this, being the custodian of this archive of things. And it's just like being a collector. It's really super fun. You should see Amy and I dork out over like, oh, this one is the same thing as the Hartford medallion, but it's got flowers instead of leaves, and look at how they did that. It's kind of a collector's dork out.
I love it. Yes.
Like delight. Yeah.
Yes, I love
So
that.
was that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so for someone who is new to this space, maybe they're just interested in historical preservation and that's kind of how they're dipping their foot in, or they walk into this place and they're like, this is it for me. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I would say there's all kinds of ways of learning. So anybody can learn how to make a mold and do an artistic project and provide an artistic service. But there has to be a realistic element about how you can house it. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is the challenge of it. But There's so many opportunities for design. Like, I make stuff for buildings. There's all kinds of opportunity to create a line of lamps or of mirror frames, if that's what you want to do. I would say the greatest opportunity for design and expansion is through design community. Or if you live in an area that has period architecture where people have a hard time finding an adequate resource to fulfill their needs, that's a great area to try to do something like that. But yeah, there's so many different artistic directions that one can take and avenues from learning the skills of what we are doing. Like, there's a company here in San Francisco called Douglas and Sturgis. They're on Bryant Street between 5th and 6th. And Artie is just, he supplies all of the mold making and sculptural materials for so many sculptors. Art supply is his thing, but it's mostly sculptural stuff and mold making. He teaches classes and like how to use all the different materials that he sells. God, I was in there the other day and he had this stuff that he was just using an architectural mold to cast this clear resin in. And I thought, how cool would that be to have like a whole room of clear ornaments? That would be so neat, you know? So I would say, you know, the directions are really endless. As far as establishing an ornamental plaster shop like this started so long ago and under such organic circumstances and fortunately under such affordable circumstances. And that's where communities can help by like providing spaces for younger artisans that want to get into doing things like this and providing technical skills. God, my husband is a trained sculptor, and the training that my husband went through to be, he learned how to weld, he learned how to do all these incredible skills that are invaluable for husbands that need to fix things around the house.
I love it.
But anyway, I would just encourage anybody to try their hand at mold making. It's just such a magical thing to pour a liquid into a negative and have it come out a positive. It's just like, wow, I'm reproducing.
And then to close, what is one thing that for anyone watching, wherever they are in their career or art expression, what is one thing that you would want to leave them with or want them to take away?
To whatever you end up doing for work, leave yourself time to explore things that you do for fun and passion, because you'd be surprised at like how suddenly the more you start working and doing the things that give you joy, that will lead to directions you might not have ever thought possible.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is amazing.
Briana, it's been an honor. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. You'll find everything we talked about, including links to today's guest, in the show notes. You can follow the show on socials @TradesShow. And if you have any guest suggestions, requests, or any questions, my contact information is in the show notes. Full episodes during the season are live every other Thursday on Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. Thank you for being here. See you next time.